The sun hung low over the jagged horizon of the Arizona territory, casting long shadows across the parched earth like fingers reaching for something lost. Dust swirled in lazy eddies around the boots of men gathered outside the weathered barn that served as the town's makeshift dance hall. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of tobacco smoke, cheap whiskey, and the faint, acrid tang of sweat-soaked leather. Fiddle strings scraped against the night, pulling reluctant tunes from the darkness, while lanterns flickered like dying stars on the rough-hewn walls. Mei Lin stood alone in the corner, her silk dress a remnant of a life left behind on the other side of the ocean clinging to her frame in the stifling heat. It was red, the color of luck in her homeland, but here it marked her as something foreign, something to be stared at. Her black hair was pinned back with a simple comb, the only thing her mother had given her before the ship carried her away. The men glanced her way, their eyes hungry, but none approached. She was property, after all, not a partner for dancing. Bought cheap off a rail crew boss who'd tired of her. Passed to Harlan Graves, the saloon owner who saw profit in her silence, across the room. Elias Thorne leaned against the bar, his hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much. He nursed a glass of rye, the liquid burning a familiar path down his throat, but it did nothing to warm the cold knot in his chest. Elias was a man of few words, his voice rough from years of swallowing dust on cattle drives from Texas to Kansas. His hands, calloused and scarred from ropes and reins, rested on the worn walnut of the bar. A Colt Peacemaker hung heavy at his hip, its grip polished from use, but he hadn't drawn it in anger since that day in Abilene, when his brother's blood had stained the street red under a merciless sun. The dance was a rare thing in Dust Creeka, frontier town clinging to life amid the saguaro and scrub. Miners, ranch hands, and drifters came for the music, the liquor, and the fleeting illusion of company. Mei Lin had been dragged here by Graves, who paraded her like a prize heifer, whispering to the crowd that she'd be up for auction come morning. "Fresh from the rails," he'd said earlier, his breath foul with rot gut. "Quiet as a mouse, works like a mule." The townsfolk laughed, but their eyes betrayed the greed beneath. Elias watched her from beneath his brim. She didn't belong here, that much was clear. Her posture was straight, unyielding, but her fingers twisted the hem of her dress in a rhythm that spoke of fear held tight. He knew that looked the quiet desperation of someone cornered by the world's indifference. It reminded him of Sarah, his wife, lost to fever on a homestead that had promised everything and delivered nothing but graves. That pain had carved him hollow, left him wandering the trails, taking jobs herding cattle or breaking horses, anything to outrun the ghosts. The fiddle player struck up a waltz, slow and mournful, and couples shuffled onto the dirt floor. Graves, a burly man with a mustache like coiled wire, grabbed Mei Lin's arm and pulled her toward the center. "Dance, girl," he growled, his voice carrying over the music. She stiffened, her dark eyes fixed on the ground, but she moved with him, her steps mechanical, devoid of joy. Elias set his glass down with a soft clink. Something stirred in him, a flicker of the man he'd been before the war, before the losses piled up like cordwood. He pushed off the bar, his boots thudding against the planks as he crossed the room. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the quiet authority in his stride. Graves noticed him approaching, his grip tightening on Mei Lin's wrist. "She's mine," Elias said, his voice low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the noise like a knife through hide. Graves turned, his face reddening. "What did you say, Thorne?" Elias met his gaze steadily. "I said she's mine. For the dance." The saloon owner barked a laugh, but there was no mirth in it. "You got money to back that claim? She's not for rent tonight. Auctions tomorrow, highest bidder gets her outright." Elias didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his hip, not threatening, just present. One dance, no harm in that. Mei Lin looked up then, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was surprise there, and something else, wariness, like a deer scenting a wolf. Graves hesitated, glancing around at the watching crowd. Refusing might spark trouble, and Elias had a reputation for being steady with a gun, even if he rarely used it. "Fine," Graves spat. "One dance, then she's back with me." Elias nodded, extending a hand to Mei Lin. She took it tentatively, her palm cool against his rough skin. As the music swelled, he led her away from Graves, his other hand resting lightly on her waist. They moved in slow circles, the dust kicking up around their feet. He could feel her tension, the way her body held itself rigid. "You don't have to talk," he murmured, his breath stirring a strand of her hair. "Just breathe." She said nothing, but her steps softened slightly, matching his rhythm. The heat of the room pressed in, the smell of lantern oil mingling with the faint floral scent that clung to her, jasmine, perhaps, a ghost from her past. Elias felt the eyes on them, the murmurs rippling through the crowd, but he ignored it all. For a moment it was just the music and the quiet space between them. When the tune ended, Graves was there, yanking her back. "That's enough," he shoved. Elias lightly, testing, "Stay out of my business, cowboy." Elias stepped back, his expression unchanging. But as he returned to the bar, he felt the knot in his chest tighten. He'd seen enough injustice in his years, the way the strong preyed on the weak, how the law bent to money and power. Dust Creek's sheriff, a man named Cutler, was in Graves' pocket, turning a blind eye to the auctions that traded in human misery. Chinese workers from the railroads, Mexicans fleeing the border wars, even orphans from back east, they all ended up on the block if they crossed the wrong path that night. Elias rode out to his small ranch on the edge of town, a modest spread with a few head of cattle and a cabin that creaked in the wind. The stars wheeled overhead, vast and indifferent, as he unsaddled his horse. A bay gelding named Scout. The animal nickered softly, nuzzling his shoulder, and Elias patted its neck, the gesture automatic. Inside, the cabin was sparse, a cot, a stove, a rifle hanging on the wall. He lit a lamp and sat at the table, staring at the flame until it blurred. Memories came unbidden. Sarah's laugh, light as prairie wind, the way she'd hum while mending his shirts. They'd dreamed of a family, a life carved from the land, but fever took her and their unborn child in a single cruel week. He'd buried them under a cottonwood tree, the soil hard and unyielding, and rode away without looking back. That was 5 years ago, and the pain had dulled to an ache, but seeing Mei Lin tonight stirred it anew. She was no kin, no lover, but her silence screamed of the same helplessness. Dawn broke hot and relentless, the sky a bleached blue. Elias rode into town early, the dust coating his chaps like a second skin. The auction was set for noon in the town square, a dusty patch ringed by saloons, a general store, and the sheriff's office. Already men gathered, their voices rough with anticipation. Graves had her chained lightly to a post, her dress smudged from the night before, her face impassive. Sheriff Cutler lounged nearby, his badge glinting in the sun, a toothpick rolling between his teeth. He was a tall man, lean and mean, with a scar twisting his lip into a perpetual sneer. "Morning, Thorne," he called as Elias dismounted. "Come to bid? Heard you took a shine to the China doll last night." Elias tied Scout to a hitching post, his movements deliberate. "Just passing through," Cutler chuckled. "Best keep it that way. Graves don't like competition." The auction started with livestock, horses, mules, a few scrawny cows. The crowd bid lazily, coins clinking in pockets warmed by the sun. Sweat trickled down Elias' back, soaking his shirt. He stood at the edge, watching as Graves dragged Mei Lin forward. She stumbled slightly, the chain rattling, but lifted her chin, her eyes scanning the faces without plea. "Bidding starts at $50, Graves announced, his voice booming. Strong back, quiet mouth, good for ranch work or ... whatever suits. Laughter rippled through the men. A miner bid first, then a rancher from out of town. The price climbed 60, 70. Elias felt his jaw tighten. He had money saved from the last drive, enough to buy her freedom, but what then? He was no savior, just a drifter with his own demons. $80. 90, a burly man named Rafe, known for his temper and his fists, shouted, 100. His grin was wolfish, his intentions clear. Mei Lin's composure cracked then, a flicker of terror in her eyes. Elias stepped forward, his voice cutting through the bids. 200. The crowd fell silent. Graves blinked, then smirked. Foreign? You serious? Elias nodded once. Cash, whispers erupted. Cutler straightened, his hand drifting to his gun. That's a lot for a whim, Cowboy, Rafe spat in the dirt. I ain't letting some saddle tramp outbid me. 220. 300, Elias said, his tone flat. The air grew thick, the heat pressing down like a weight. Graves hammered the gavel after no one countered. Sold to Elias Thorne. As Elias handed over the bills crisp from the bank in Tucson, Graves unchained her. May Lynn rubbed her wrist, her gaze meeting Elias again. There was no gratitude there, only questions. She's yours now, Graves said, pocketing the money. No returns.